It's really awesome to be here. So first of all, welcome everybody to the first day of the Executive IT Summit. My name is Sanjay Sood. I run technology IT within CDW. So I'm kind of you in the audience. And that's why it's so exciting to be here, because it's great to kind of pull back the curtain on CDW's own technology infrastructure and how we think about our own digital transformation. But today I really want to talk about prioritization. And I thought it was a great conversation with Aletha and Isle, where essentially this notion of there's always going to be more stuff that your teams are asked to do than either you have budget for, you have resources for, you have expertise for, right? And ultimately you end up being put in a position where you have to make decisions around what do you prioritize, what don't you prioritize, and then how do you tell the story at the end of the year when you're kind of in front of your bosses or your boss's bosses, and they're like, well, what did you accomplish, right? And you have to go and you have to explain. So I'm going to talk today about how I think about prioritization, how my team thinks about prioritization, and I'm actually really excited to have a special guest who's going to join me after just I give the high-level overview. Our CFO, Miralles, is actually in the house. So when you think about IT investments, usually you have somebody within technology, and then on the other side you have a partner in the finance department who's sitting with you, planning with you, helping you rationalize what you're spending on, creating those business cases. So it's going to be awesome to have Al up here to give you some insights on how a company like CDW prioritizes and how we think about our investments. So before we go into the details of prioritization, what are we prioritizing against? Right, and ultimately you're prioritizing against a set of initiatives, a company strategy. And at CDW, there's two things happening. So number one, we're in the middle of a large technology transformation that started about 3 years ago. I started 4 years ago. So you can imagine kind of this is a lot of what my team has been built up to do. We're executing right now. But we're not doing a technology transformation just for the sake of doing it. We're actually doing it to support our corporate strategy. Right? And our corporate strategy, we call it Mission Forward. And Mission Forward really has three pillars. And Aletha talked about a lot of this, but number one is how do we accelerate our services and solutions business? So this, you saw all the logos of all the companies that we've acquired over the last few years. This is all about making sure that we have capability, full stack capability, to help our customers tackle the most complex business problems. Number two is delivering the best omni-channel experience. And what does this mean? People want digital access, they want to talk to people, they want to have relationships, they want to use chat, they want to use phone. And as CDW, as a provider of solutions, how do we make sure that we can serve our customers no matter how they want to talk to us? And then finally, almost every company has something called Innovate Our Operating Model. This is essentially how do you do things more efficiently, how do you drive productivity, how do you scale in a way that is profitable and effective and helps you serve your customers. So the technology transformation that I'm doing is really about how do you enable this three-pronged strategy, right? And what we believe at CDW, and I know a lot of you believe it because you're in the room, is that technology is a superpower. It's part of the strategy of the company, right? It's not just a cost center, something that you spend money on. It's something that will drive real, true outcomes to your business. And so we're in the middle of our own transformation, and I want to give you some insights in terms of how we think about it. Now, for my team, the technology IT team, we established what's our vision and what's our mission. Our vision, very simply, is how do we become a strategic partner to the business, right? So once again, we're not just a bill that has to be paid. Yes, people need telephones, they need infrastructure, they need software, but how does the business think of us as a partner to help them create those superpowers that help us serve our customers, our ecosystems better? And our mission is really to achieve that. It's through having world-class systems, secure systems, reliable systems, modern systems, flexible systems, that when the business has to pivot or has to help serve customers in a different way, we have the technology that can support them in an efficient and effective way. So maybe a little bit of a deeper dive in the technology transformation. People ask me, well, why did you transform? Three words typically come into my mind. Number one is legacy. So CDW has been around the block. It's 40 years, I think, this year. And we started from a very different company of being a product reseller to where we are today. And so along the way, we built a lot of systems that help support the business, things that were on mainframes, using legacy technology. There's a lot of old ways of doing things in terms of the technology stack and the software. And that legacy kind of gets in the way of us doing new things, serving our customers and serving our partners in new ways. Number two is strain. So when you have a legacy stack with lots of technical debt in it, right? When you've done acquisitions and you've kind of slammed companies together, you end up introducing a lot of strain for coworkers outside and inside of technology. Right? We hear about swivel chairing, we hear about redundant systems, Band-Aids. We have a lot of what we call human middleware, right? Where you have people kind of in the mix where you're saying, hey, look, technology could probably do this better, but you're adding unnecessary strain into the organization. And ultimately, our organization is customer focused. We want almost all our coworkers to be serving customers, helping them with their problems, less so struggling with their own systems. And then finally, complexity, right? The complexity of our business has increased quite a bit, right? And we've kept pace along the way, acquiring companies, acquiring capabilities, but technology has gotten way more complex than it has ever been, right? You throw in things like AI and cloud and data and analytics and all sorts of new technology that's emerging, AR, VR. It's very, very complex out there, and so you really have to modernize the technology in order to make that happen. So as I mentioned, about 3 years ago, we embarked on a very ambitious technology transformation. Like many transformation, it starts with the three major pillars. At the core of everything is your people. So number one is your people, then your process, and then your technology. For people, we know that that's what makes our team special, right? Even my team, in terms of our IT function. And so we focused on a set of areas, primarily how do we upskill and reskill our coworkers, because we were changing technology. We're moving from some legacy technology to newer technology, and how do we make sure that we bring as many people along as possible? How do we change the culture and the behaviors of the team? So how do we make people embrace change, lead from the front, feel like they are part of the solution, not part of the problem? And then how do we globalize our workforce? We knew that there was going to be a lot of heavy lifting, so how do we think beyond just the horizons of the United States and look globally to have follow the sun capabilities and to be able to expand our capacity to get things done? On the technology side, this is where a lot of the fun and the rubber hits the road. How do we move from a primarily on-prem set of systems to a hybrid cloud architecture? So we've done a lot of that heavy lifting. How do we modernize a lot of our platforms? So behind the scenes, we're doing a very massive re-platforming a lot of our back-end systems. We lovingly call it alphabet soup because it includes our OMS, CRM, PSA, CPQ, ERP, HCM. I think I got them all, right? So lots of alphabets, but those are like essentially all the systems we use to run the back-end system, our back-end office. And we're re-platforming those. And then finally, we put a lot of emphasis and investment in our AI and data strategy. I could probably spend the next 2 hours talking to you about AI and data because it's something that I've studied and worked on for most of my career. But today I want to focus on the center column, which is really about the process. So you could have really great technology, you could have really great people, but really where it helps propel an organization is that process piece of it. So there's a couple things that we focused on. Number one was doing an agile transformation. So when I started, we were running kind of classic waterfall on spreadsheets. We moved a lot of our organization to SAFe, which is Scaled Agile Framework for the Enterprise. This helps us move more agile. It helps us consolidate our asks, helps us prioritize better, and essentially be more flexible to the business needs. We also established a whole bunch of new governance, right? And governance is, maybe a four-letter word or a word that's not particularly interesting, but it helped us keep kind of cadence. How do we want to think about the needs of the organization? What are the rituals and the meetings and all those things to help us keep on track? But what I want to talk today is the technology portfolio. And the title of this talk is The Art of Prioritization, because I actually believe it is an art. Right? There's a lot of science that people potentially tell you to do, which is, hey, look, put things in spreadsheets, put things in this ITBM, you'll have all this data, and then all of a sudden you have a technology portfolio. But what I've learned in this role at CDW, that there's a lot of art that goes into it. So how do you think about constructing that portfolio? How do you report that portfolio? And ultimately, it's a series of stories that you tell at the end of a project. Right? When you go to your stakeholders and you talk to them and you say, hey, here's what you got for this investment and here's how it made the business better, that's not something the system's going to tell you. It's something that you have to construct, right? So there's an authorship and an art to that as well. All right. So what is a technology portfolio? I put kind of the dictionary definition here. It's a compilation of information about a firm's investments in information technology, blah, 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 right? But ultimately, what it means is aggregating all the stuff that you're doing to support the firm and being able to report out on its status, the investment, the value it's driving, and ultimately why you're doing it and why does it make sense. Okay, so when we think about the portfolio at CDW, there's really kind of three areas that we think about. Number one is constructing the portfolio. So you gotta start with something, right? In a spreadsheet, you might have it. I'm sure every company here that you guys represent, you have a spreadsheet somewhere that has all the list of the projects that you're doing, right? Some of you may have put them into a system. Some of you might actually be well beyond what I'm going to talk about today, where you essentially have the polished portfolio of critical projects that you delivered and the value that you deliver to your executives on a quarterly basis. But the number one piece that you have to do is you have to think about constructing it. Now, at the most basic level, you can boil it down to every project that you do, every program that you run falls into one of three buckets. The most important are the strategic ones, right? So the strategy of what are the new products I'm supporting, what are the new use cases I'm supporting, M&A, new growth, new revenue streams. So all the things that your CEO or your board or your executive team are talking about, a lot of those are going to be the strategic initiatives, right? And you want to actually spend a lot of time thinking about those. How do you articulate those? How do you construct those? At CDW, all the areas around mission forward that I mentioned, those three pillars, those end up being strategic programs, right? We also have a big M&A set of activities that we do. Those are strategic because it's all about growing the company, growing our capabilities. The second bucket is enhancements, right? And roughly what this means is what are all the things that already exist that I'm making better, right? So these are adding new features to your e-commerce site. It could be things around adding additional tools around cybersecurity. It's building on top of what you already have, right? And this is really important stuff because it's how do I take what I have and optimize it. The final bucket is sustainment, right? And this is always the conversation you have, which is, if you had to, if a cataclysmic event happened to your company and you had to really squeeze the belt, what would remain, right? This is essentially keeping the lights on, right? And that's a lot of the activity that oftentimes you don't talk about to your stakeholders, right? It's things like, I gotta upgrade these end-of-life servers in the data center, right? I have this critical patching that has to be done, otherwise we're in trouble, right? I have a service desk that has to serve the coworkers across the globe because if they don't have working tech, they can't get their job done. And then underneath each of these sections, you might have subcategories, right? And so we essentially use this as the top-level taxonomy, strategic sustainment enhancement, and then underneath it, we have subcategories. It doesn't go much below that. And these are categories that all the executives at CDW understand. They understand that what we invest in is going to be a mix of all three of these buckets. And so this is how we've constructed it, okay? The prioritization method, once again, there's a lot of art and science in here, right? And you heard Ayal and Alitha talk about, how do you prioritize against value, right? And value is it's an interesting topic because value is at least what I've experienced, and I would love to talk to you if anybody has a precise formula of measuring value. Value is in the eye of the beholder, right? It depends on who's asking for it, right? It could be somebody from the business saying, well, if you do this one project, I'm going to generate 30% more revenue, right? You might have somebody coming to you and saying, if you don't do this, the risk to the company is going to be immense, right? Therefore, the ROI on this project is incalculable, right? You're going to have, oftentimes when finance comes, they'll have a very precise business case that they've written out with, every single quarter of what the payback is and ROI. But this is something that you actually have to care about. And what I found really important is actually doing this with finance, right? You need to have somebody who's counting and keeping track of essentially what the value is that you're hoping to achieve. And that is really, really important to have. Number two is the alignment with the company OKRs and KPIs, right? So hopefully your companies have some level of kind of a strategy articulated. You're looking at your spreadsheet of things and you're asking your question, how does this tie to that corporate strategy? And can you sit in front of your leadership or your CEO and say, this project's important because it will impact this KPI that you're trying to drive for your customers, your shareholders, or your coworkers. Number three is managing through program increments. And this is something that we did through that safe, agile transformation, is we kept a planning cycle that lets us plan work in these things called PIs, program increments. They run 12 weeks. So essentially we plan, we execute 12 weeks of work, and then we replan, execute another 12 weeks of work. So you essentially get 4 quarters a year of being able to kind of replan the work. Inside of that, we're running 2-week sprints. So if something kind of new comes that's like really urgent and can't wait for that new PI, we can go in and we can rejigger priorities based on evaluation of number 1 and number 2. And then 4, this is something that we did very recently, is we essentially constrained funding with guardrails. And what does that mean? It means that on a yearly basis, I sit down with Al. Al essentially says, hey, look, here's how much we're going to make the IT budget, capital, OpEx. We allocate it then against the strategic enhancement sustainment portfolios. And we use those as guardrails, right? Because you're never going to have free money, right? As much as you want, like you're not going to get checks written every week for doing new things. This helps us stay disciplined because at some point, somebody from the business, somebody from one of my stakeholders is going to ask for a project that essentially goes over one of these funding guardrails, right? At that point, then I can go to the finance team and say, and the business team and sit down and say, okay, how do we solve this? Do we want to move money from one bucket to another? Or do we want to reallocate some way else? But it gives you a good way to articulate at least some constraints on the portfolio so you don't get stuck from an IT perspective of kind of holding the bag and having to be the bad guy, okay? Optimize. So this is where, really a lot of the work has happened in the last couple of years in terms of now that you have this portfolio, how do you optimize that portfolio? And if we know anything in the last few years, there's just been a lot of uncertainty, right? There's the pandemic, there's hybrid work, there's AI, there's all sorts of kind of uncertainty. And so you should be prepared within your portfolio to pull a set of levers in order to make room within your capacity. And so the ones that we think about quite a bit is number 1, the business case. There is always a risk of over pivoting on a business case and getting too precise, especially when it's something that is a strategic investment. It's a bet, right? Now, when you say, hey, look, I want to create a new product, you want to have some sort of market intelligence, you want to have some of that intel, but to the dollars and cents, you're not going to be able to predict revenue, right? So you're going to have to take some liberty in terms of building those business cases. But once again, at CDW, we've created a really good relationship with our FP&A team, where we're essentially vetting all the major projects we do with finance, and we're putting some assumptions down. Hey, here's what we think this thing is going to cost. Here's what the payout's going to be, and having that second check with finance is really, really good. On software expenditures, this is something that we had to do to make room for some more strategic priorities. Was essentially to maximize utilization of the software that we bought, right? I mean, that's a theme the last couple of years now has been you have all this software, you bought all this cloud, how do you optimize it? We went through something similar. Many of you probably went through something as well, which is, okay, how do I make sure that I'm utilizing what I've bought so I don't have things sitting on the shelf that I'm paying money for, right? And that's really important. That's what we used a lever in order to make room, like I said, for more strategic initiatives. The resourcing model, we created a flexible part of our resourcing model. So using third-party development firms, right, where we can kind of ramp them up, ramp them down. This gave us the ability to be able to react to new opportunities that came on board where we didn't have to essentially drop something in the portfolio, say, well, in order to do this more important thing, I'm going to stop doing this thing. We had at least a lever where we could bring on some resources to help us. And then automation. Lots of small automation, large automation, a lot of it within my team of how do you free up coworkers that could be doing work for the portfolio and automate some of the redundancy that they were doing, right? And so this is something that we focused and invested in as well. And then finally, tracking outcomes. This is really, really important because you guys are going to be asked to do a lot from your stakeholders in your business. And what you want to do is that when that project launches, you still want to keep a scorecard, right? And this goes back to that business case that you created with finance, which is now as a quarter goes by, a year goes by, let's dust off that business case and just check those assumptions again, right? Because you're going to learn things that you were really good at predicting. You're going to also learn things that you were not good at predicting, right? And so using that as refinement back into those business cases is incredibly important to make sure that you're maximizing the value of that technology investment and making sure that you're getting the best bang for the buck. Okay. So reporting. This is by far the most, I think, what I would say, creative part of this process, which is how do you report this out? And oftentimes, and I made this mistake, is I just kind of gave the raw data to the executives and I said, here you go. You want to see it? Here it is, right? And I think most of my colleagues, like, there's too much detail. It's kind of overwhelming. And they're like, well, what's the story around this, right? Now, if you show that to, if I was to show that same spreadsheet to my team, they'd be like, oh, no, I get it. Can I have more details? Like, I want to drill down and actually want to know exactly what the use cases were in the user stories. So you got to find kind of a happy medium. So if we go kind of left to the right here, number one is reporting by horizon. And by horizon, I mean essentially, how do you have a portfolio that's balanced with immediate term needs, but also medium and long-term bets? So horizon 0 is typically things that are going to have immediate impact. Like if I do this today, I'm going to be able to reap benefits. All the way to horizon 3, which is this might have a 3 to 5 year payoff, right? This might be highly speculative, very, very high probability of failure. And when you think about the portfolio and you step back, most companies want to have some balance of all of them, right? You want to have a lot of bets up in the closer horizons and fewer bets off to the end. If you're a technology company, whether you're an NVIDIA or a Meta or a Google, you probably are maybe backloaded to the right, where you're essentially doing a whole lot of moonshots. But being able to articulate your portfolio and say, hey, look, 80% of my spend is sitting in horizon 0 and 1, 10% in horizon 2, 5% in horizon 3 gives you an ability to talk about some of the long-term investments that you're making in terms of your capability and your priorities. Number 2, obviously, is certainly by investments. Can you slice your data and say, of all the spend that I have within this portfolio, here's what's going towards strategic initiatives. Here's essentially what my fixed cost is, which is that sustainment cost. And that's something that's often not understood by people who are not sitting in IT. Is that there's a huge fixed cost to running an IT organization, right? You have personnel, you have hardware, you have software licenses, you have potentially a data center you're running, and those things you can't just turn those off, right? Those are actually used to run the business. And so having a clear view of what that fixed cost is really important as well. And then finally, understanding the impact by audience and the impact that it gives to them. So, one of the things that we just tried out recently is after one of our planning increments, our team sat down with our business stakeholders and we said, can you just in a couple sentences write how this made a user persona within the business, like made their life easier? Just like very easily, like, this enhancement that we made to this platform made it much easier for the customer to automatically get back to their customers within an SLA of 5 minutes, right? Just something very simple, like anybody could understand it. And it was actually really important to have that because at the end of the day, the stakeholders who are looking at technology to deliver capability, they want to understand, hey, what did you deliver? Put it in plain English. How can I go tell my team, or how are you going to tell my team, what did I get for this investment? You also want to be able to talk to the technical teams within your team, what did you deliver, right? And so that narrative around the audience, the story, the storytelling becomes really important. And what I found, once again, is that a system's not going to get you this, right? You could have a really sophisticated ITBM, you could have the coolest spreadsheet, but it's going to take some analysis and strategic thinking of putting yourself in the seat of the person receiving that technology, and just making it very, very simple for them to understand what was delivered and why. All right. So ultimately, this portfolio is part of the broader technology strategy and what we're trying to do at CDW. And as I mentioned, we're trying to move up this trajectory here, moving from a cost center to a business strategic partner, right? And that happens through innovation. And the technology portfolio, maybe it's not the cutting edge AI, that you're potentially going to bring to your audience, but it is kind of the fundamental way that you think about these investments. And how you articulate value to your stakeholders, okay? So the takeaways, if you haven't, create your portfolio, as it is today, take an inventory of all the things that you're doing and try figuring out how to categorize them. What's your ontology? What's your taxonomy? Create the narratives that you want for your org and synthesize the strategy and operations, right? This is where you're gonna put your creative hat on and say, okay, how do I explain this project? Because otherwise it's gonna look like a list of random stuff to your stakeholders. And then finally, business case and joint investment decisions and prioritization with the business. So, for the big projects, I love being in a room where I have finance and business in that room, where we're talking about the investment case, we're talking about the outcomes we want to drive, we have commitment on adoption, change management, and we're really holding hands when it comes to making sure that we're making the wisest investments possible. All right, so thank you, and then I want to have Al, I think you're out there, Al. Al Miralles is our Senior Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and I would love to get Al's reaction to the technology portfolio, and ultimately ask him some questions. As the CFO of let's see, Fortune 180 company, 160-ish. How you think about technology investment. I think it'll be insightful for our audience here.
Yeah. Let me just start, Sanjay. I do have a bone to pick with you. So Sanjay and I have been working together for a few years, and over that time, I can't tell you how many times he's asked me, what does it take for you to approve a technology project? And I've resisted to this point to give him the Dakota ring. So I was driving over today and I thought, he is super creative. Put a room of hundreds of our best customers together, and now he's going to ask me. So, and just to prove my point that you're ganging up on me, show of hands of anybody in the room that knows something about technology. And now a show of hands of people that are finance experts.
Yes.
Okay, I proved my point.
Yeah. Well, Al, I mean, it's awesome to have you here. I mean, if you think about, prioritization, right, and that's like a big part of it. Like, I would love, like you said, you and I have been working together. I think we've improved our processes internally and kind of how we vet. It was a bit of the Wild Wild West for a while. But I would love to kind of get your thoughts of how you get started with applying kind of a prioritization method, right? Like we talked about today.
Sure. Yeah. A couple things, Sanjay. First, I start thinking about technology projects and portfolio almost like your investment portfolio. So if you think about your own investment portfolio, your 401k, so what do you think about? You think about what's in my portfolio today. You have to have context of your portfolio. You think about the macroeconomic forces. Where are we in the cycle, if you will? You think about strategic alignment and what do we need from a strategy perspective. And then you think about what are the benefit streams that we're going to get from a project portfolio investment. And they're all the things that you think about. And so if you think about that as your portfolio, you want to make a change in your 401k or otherwise, you're contemplating all of those factors. So I think it varies similarly. It's about diversification. It's about alignment to what you're strategically trying to achieve. And it's about knowing your time horizon and what returns you're going to get ultimately from a finance perspective.
Yeah, no, that's great. And obviously, because my business cases that I bring to you are just so well formed and just so easy to approve.
Right.
I would love to kind of inside CDW, previous jobs that you've had. When somebody from technology comes to you with a business case, what are the characteristics that you're looking for, right? Because you obviously have a whole bunch of people coming, looking, seeking for investment, and you have to make choices, right? Because no company can fund everything, right?
Yep.
So the question for you is, what are you thinking about, and what are you observing in terms of characteristics of those where you come out of it feeling really good, and be like, yeah, this team prepared. I get it, I understand it, ready to go.
Yep. A couple things I call out. First of all, I thought your materials and presentation hit a lot of really important things, so I will not drain all of those things again. But number one, strategic alignment, obviously super, super important, right? And when you see random things that don't really fit in the strategy, the bar is going to be higher in terms of getting over that bar. So strategic alignment, number one for sure. Number two would be really, again, understanding kind of what are the benefits on the other side. So I'll go just further on the finance side. We have to think about when you're investing, what are we ultimately going to get out of it? I'll come back to that as an example. And then number three, I'll call it financial context. When you're approaching your finance partner, understand, is it going to be CapEx? Is it going to be OpEx? When do we think the returns are going to happen? How's it going to show up in your financials? And I would say when someone comes with a fully baked presentation kind of hits all those elements, it's clear they've done their homework. That's a great start, and that helps with the conversation.
Yeah. What do you think about, and I mentioned it a little bit about the Horizon 3 beyond kind of investments in terms of how you think about a business case for that, right? So, sometimes they're speculative. Sometimes you don't know what the number is in terms of ROI, but you have, a set of assumptions or a gut feeling.
Yeah.
What I've seen at least, and I'm maybe you've seen this in your career, is that people, they get wrapped around trying to get like the exact number when it's like literally just, it's kind of a guess.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you think about uncertainty in some of these business cases and maybe some of the more speculative moonshot investments that a business might be thinking about making?
I think about them as requiring to have to risk adjust those items. I'll give you an example. We have a ton of tech transformation going on for ourselves, and a lot of that work is modernizing our application stack, and ultimately it would include sunsetting some of our systems. There's always going to be the benefits around people and productivity, et cetera. When I look at a project like that, I go, okay, clarity and confidence in being able to sunset the systems, I typically feel good about that. We're going to put in the new application. We're going to want to and need to sunset the system. So that's solid. I wouldn't kind of put a big kind of risk weighting on that, if you will. Then you get into things that either go further out or are tied to other implications or other projects that then I would have to say I'd have to risk weight them a bit and say, do we think they're going to play out? It's never perfect, but they're the variables I think about. And I always go to the who's going to be around to make sure these benefits happen, right? And it's classic, the projects that you say, oh, they're going to be 2 years and we'll get to the payback and it's going to be fantastic. And sometimes they end up being 4 years and people leave or other projects take over or the kind of the landscapes change. So for those reasons, you have to think about how do you risk weight those things.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. So let me ask you about, when you think about a specific area of investment, right, and whether do you dial the temperature up in terms of adding more money or do you deprioritize it, right? Because there's, like I said, there's a lot of stuff on the plate, right? And oftentimes you're swapping one thing out for another. You're essentially saying, hey, look, this thing was a good idea, but maybe it's time to go focus our energy somewhere else. And so kind of your thought process of how do you evaluate that?
First, I do think you need to be agile, right? Again, back to your investment portfolio. There are times when you go, boy, equities have really run. I think it's time to take some money off the table and do something different. I think the same way in terms of technology. You obviously you place your bets, but diversification matters. And so I do think there's an element there that you got to think about spreading it around, knowing your business is going to change, it's going to pivot, it's going to adjust. So when I think about adding or subtracting, it's the biggest thing for me is diversification and saying, let's not put all our chips on black. Let's be realistic that some things are going to pivot, therefore it's okay to spread some things around once in a while.
Okay. So, you've given us maybe a bit of the happy path, right, in terms of, what you've seen that succeeded, how you think about, dialing up and down. Do you have an anecdote? I know it's not at CDW, where somebody came to you with like a really terrible business case, right? And you just, what did you see in it that you're just like, no, sorry, start again?
Yeah. First of all, we get business cases for other projects besides tech, right? So you're competing, and all of you are probably competing with other areas as well. My classic one would be someone comes with something, it maybe isn't quite aligned with our strategy, it's off the beaten path, and they're pitching a proof of concept that they want to see play out, and it's built on some concept of that. If we build it, all of our customers are going to come and they're all going to want it and it's going to be fantastic. And that would be a case where I would drill down and say, you got to prove it a little bit more. And particularly if it involves saying we're going to add on run rate expenses or we're really front-ended, where we're putting a lot of risk in our investment without the guarantee of the payoff. And so it's not that there isn't a place for those things, but obviously you'd probably say in your own investment portfolio, I'm going to keep that at a smaller size and let it prove out, as opposed to being, let's put it all in kind of the speculative type items.
Yeah, no, good, sound advice. It would be kind of remiss not having a question around AI, right? And I know that there's going to be multiple sessions talking about AI. I would love, as you've been talking to, the street, you've been talking to investors, you certainly talk to customers. What are you hearing in terms of, the AI impacting, right? I mean, we obviously see a ton of investment going in. We see a lot of the growth in the stock market on kind of AI promise, especially in the tech sector.
Yeah.
Kind of what are you hearing and how are you thinking about it? Maybe from an external perspective, but then, also from an internal perspective, because this is, certainly a tool that has a tremendous amount of promise in terms of helping drive efficiency within an organization. But maybe two sides of it. Like, what are you hearing from the street and kind of, how do you perceive it kind of in a macroeconomic perspective, but then also, how are you thinking about it within CDW?
First of all, I think it's a fascinating time. And I do think that we're going to look back and say, wow, what a transformational area or chapter it was as we think about AI. If you think about other transformational technologies of things that have happened, it's even got more breadth and depth than any of those other ones, really. Even think about cloud. AI, just the potential is huge. I would say that the financial markets definitely have a euphoria, and they see all of that potential. You could argue kind of some of that is more than built in. It's baked into a lot of the premiums at this point, and I think Wall Street sees all of that potential. So I'd say relative to that, it is, I think, in the grand scheme, early days. There's a lot of discovery, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of work and money being spent, but it's early days in terms of really the breadth and depth and how I think it will play out and the variety of use cases they ultimately we're going to see. For CDW, I think it's game changer, right? If you think about our strategy, and Sanjay hit on it a bit, right, in terms of solutions and services, our omni-channel and our operating model, all of those will be impacted by AI. Our partner ecosystem is vast with investments that are happening to kind of bring up the next generation of products. So I think it's going to be game changer for our business. When I think internally, likewise, what I love about it is more than any transformational type of thing, it really can be grassroots. Think about technology projects that have happened in all your companies and even our company. Very often it's top down and then our coworkers get on board. AI has the potential to be massively grassroots, and that's super, super exciting. I don't think we've pierced the surface of the type of stuff that we're going to see. Yeah. Even for finance, already really excited about the payoff potential.
Yeah, no, and certainly with the latest kind of invention or not invention, but the mass availability of large language models, right? There's a whole other kind of realm of AI. RPA, we've been doing that a lot between our departments for many years before ChatGPT was launched. Some of the traditional machine learning models as well, and so we've been making those investments internally. But you see now this huge opportunity with some of this more powerful technology. But I agree, early days, and a lot of that foundational capability, understanding your data, getting it secured, kind of all those pieces. Good. Well, anything else, Al, that you had kind of on top of your mind in terms of technology portfolio, technology investing?
No, I think it's just an exciting time, right? It's like we're on to the next chapter, and it's a chapter, I think, of potential upside, but complexity, and that's what I'm excited about, and how we, CDW, can really serve you guys most effectively in a challenging but super, super exciting and complex environment. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, so thank you, everybody. We're at the end of the session. Appreciate the attention. Thank you, Al, for coming over here and giving us your perspective. I find, as I mentioned, that partnership between finance, technology, and the business incredibly powerful, right? So how do you build those relationships and make sure that as a technology person, you can translate to those different constituencies and make sure that ultimately that portfolio, and I like the analogy just to your investment portfolio, make sure it's balanced, make sure it's transparent, make sure you know where those allocations becomes incredibly important as you mature. And ultimately, you're trying to go to somebody like Al and secure additional funding to accomplish some sort of technology or strategic goal. So
See, he's right back to it again, right? He's right. Always selling.
Always selling. Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody.